Hey guys, welcome back to the channel where I cover missing persons, unsolved cases, crime news, and more. So we're going to go through a bit of, we can't really call it testimony because it wasn't in front of the jury. But day 6, which was Friday, the parents of Christopher Greger took the stand to basically they gave their testimony and the judge decided if they're going to testify this week. From what I understand, he's going to allow them to testify to a degree. I think it's on certain aspects. So I'm going to kind of go through. First up would be Dad, and he's a former trooper. So yeah, he's a former cop. And then Mom. A lot stands out from their testimony, and I will comment along the way. But the biggest to me, and I just can't stop thinking about it, is that neither grandparent of Corey on Christopher's side have watched the treadmill video. And that is pretty telling. I realize you don't want to believe that your son is a monster as everyone's claiming he is, but at the same time, if you really truly loved your grandson Corey, wouldn't you want to see the truth and feel like you're giving the protection and love to him as well? But everybody's different, and apparently the Gregors are not. They don't think that way.
I have two witnesses today. They're Mr. Greger's parents, David and Carolyn Greger. They're going to discuss their testimony is basically to set up how Corey came into their life, where Mr. Greger was at that time, when Mr. Greger moved out, and then the events that took place between March 20th and April, I guess it would be 3rd. That's basically what they're going to call to testify.
Thank you. And the state wants to have this hearing because you're concerned about whether or not you received the full proffer and what testimony may come out in front of the jury and whether it would be admissible or not?
Yes, Judge. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Gallucci, you can call your first witness.
We call David Greger.
David Greger.
Mr. Gallucci.
Thank you, Judge. How are you, Mr. Greger?
Hanging in there.
Okay.
Notice, Christopher has had this expressionless look on his face. But when his parents get on the stand, he's got like a smirk going on. Very different behavior from Christopher here.
I am.
Okay. And what's your wife's?
Carolyn.
Do you have any children?
I have 4.
Okay. And can you tell us who they are?
My oldest son is David. He's 35. The next in line is Kimberly. She's 32. Then it's Christopher. And then my son Daniel's 28.
Okay. Now, how old is Christopher?
Born in 92, so it's 31. I know the birth dates. I have to do the math on the ages. It constantly changes.
So I'm going to direct you to August of 2017. In August of 2017, did you know of Rebecca or Brianna or Corey Mitchell?
I didn't at that time.
Okay. So when was the first time that you knew of them?
I received a call in late 2017, early 2018. I forget exactly what month it was. And it was from a lady that identified herself as Rebecca Micciola.
And after you received that phone call, do not tell me what she told you, but after you received that phone call, did you have conversations with your son?
I did.
Okay. And what did you discuss with your son?
We discussed the nature of the phone call, and that was that they believed Christopher was the father of a young boy.
Okay. And after you spoke to your son, what was the next time that anything dealing with Corey Picholo was done?
So Christopher was away, and he was coming back that weekend. My daughter at the time was still living with us. And so when she came home from work, I had a discussion with her about the nature of the phone call. She knew the name, but didn't know anything about Chris being a potential father of a young boy. Within a day or two, Kimberly produced a document that she was on social media and brought it down. I believe it was from Topics, which I'm not familiar with. But the gist of that was a conversation between people that strongly suggested that Christopher wasn't the father.
Okay. Now, you said that Christopher was coming home for the weekend. In August of 2017, where was Christopher living?
Christopher was living in Baltimore.
What was he doing? If you know, what was he doing?
Christopher was in the Johns Hopkins program for his master's degree in education with the urban teachers. So he was attending school, and at the same time he was being mentored in the classroom to teach.
Now, did there come a time that you heard from this person who identified as solid?
Objection, Judge, hearsay,
Did there come a time?
that you heard from the person, like,
Did you receive a phone call?
Yeah, I don't think he was going to answer the content of the
Okay.
conversation.
I
right?
wasn't.
Okay.
Did you receive a phone call from a person, again, who identified themselves as Rebecca Picholo?
I did.
Okay. And how long in time was it between the first phone call you received from this person to the second time you received the call?
The second call was weeks later, because then subsequently there was a third call. But the second call was a few weeks later.
Now, after you received the second phone call from this person who identified herself as Rebecca Picholo, did you have another conversation with your son?
I did at some point. The second conversation was very short with Rebecca.
Did there come a time when now Corey Michelo became part of the Gregor family?
There did.
Okay, and do you recall when that was?
Corey's first visit was in the beginning of August of 2019. It was just a visit for a couple hours. I remember it because Christopher went to pick him up. And it was a big day for us. It was my only grandson. He came for a couple-hour visit, and the preparation, everything at the house was about Corey. I remember going through I had 4 children, they all played sports, so I was going through all the old equipment now that the children were older and pulling out all kinds of balls and baseballs and footballs. And
So, you met him at that time. You testified that he was your only grandchild at that time.
Yes,
So, at that time, your children were all older.
they were.
So now, did there come a time when, besides a visit, that Corey became, it became more than just visitation? And by the way, where did you live at this time?
We lived in Monroe.
And that's here in New Jersey.
It is,
Okay.
Middlesex County.
Okay. So did there come a time where it became more than just he came over for a visit?
August 28th was the next visit that I remember, and I believe that was ordered through the court. At that time, it was close to him beginning overnight visits, so we actually had set up a bedroom for him and did everything we could to prepare for him to arrive. But there was so much more than just the tangible things to get ready, because there became some serious discussion in terms of what we needed to do to prepare for him based on the dialogue that I had had with his grandmother.
Now, when you say, without telling us what that dialogue was, what are some of the things that you did to prepare for Corey now moving in or having more contact with him, overnight visits? What were some of the things that you needed to do?
Well, school hadn't started yet, so it was everything in terms of making his life comfortable. It was what size clothes did he wear, what food did he like, what were his hobbies, setting his room up so he was comfortable because he really didn't know us very well. So it was everything to make him comfortable to live with us, all his likes, and it was during his visits trying to get that information from him without sitting down and browbeating him in terms of everything he liked, everything he didn't like. It was just spending the time with him and getting a feel for what we could do best for him when he arrived.
Okay. So now this is just overnight visitation at this point.
In the end of August, yes.
So did there come a time from August 28th of 2019 that overnight visit became greater than just overnight visit?
It did.
And what was that?
I believe it was October.
Okay, and what happened in October that changed?
In October, Christopher had filed for custody, the way I remember it, and he became the custodial parent. And so with that, Corey began to live with us. And I say live with us, it was for a certain time period. It was Mondays through Thursdays, then he would go back to his grandmother's house on Fridays after school and then come back to us off the school bus on Monday. There's times where that was changed based on holidays, based on vacations, so it seemed, I'm going to say changed often. It wasn't steadfast. It did change, but in our minds, he was living with us and he would visit with his grandmother.
Okay. So when he was living with you, were you working?
I was. I'm self-employed. I set my own schedule. And part of our plan to accept Corey into our home was that I could do such where I could make my schedule, because Chris was teaching at the time. So
When you say Chris, you're talking about your son.
Christopher was teaching at the time in Camden. And we knew that in order to take him, besides the challenges we had in front of us, to make him most comfortable and to assist in his learning, I thought it best if I could be there almost during all his waking hours. It didn't always happen that way, but for the most part, it involved getting up very early with him. My wife was reporting to the office at the time with her job, and my wife would make him breakfast. If Christopher was still home, which was a rarity during the first 3 months because he was leaving at 6 a.m. So Corey went up, he either took a shower the night before or he took a shower that morning, and it was me that monitored him and helped him get dressed. And when he came down for breakfast, it was a total commitment. He'd come down for breakfast, I'd go through his book bag, and we'd make sure all his assignments were there, his lunch was ready, anything for school that he needed. And as soon as he got off the school bus, which dropped him off right in front of our house at about 3 o'clock, I was there to meet him off the school bus.
So you went from grandpa to almost father.
We often jokingly said that, we just had our fifth child. And it wasn't for a lack of commitment from Chris, but it was our game plan as a family to do the best that we could for him.
Okay. Now, when you first were introduced to Corey, did he live somewhere other than Monroe?
He did.
Do you know where he lived?
He lived in Jamesburg.
Okay. Do you know if he went to school there?
He did.
Okay. Now, when Chris became the custodial parent, did you change the school system?
Changed the school within the first few months, yes.
Okay. And where did he now go to school?
He went to Monroe schools and he went to Barclay Brooks School.
Okay. So, had your children went through that school system?
They all did.
Okay. And were you familiar with the school system?
Very.
Okay. And what did you do as a grandparent or father with respect to that, his education?
Well, part of the
Briefly.
our I was totally involved in his education. Monroe has a system by which you can go online, and much to my other children's chagrin during their careers in the school, I was on there every day. And I was on there checking for assignments, checking for grades, checking for, in general, how he was doing. He had some classes that were more of a challenge in blocks of instruction than others. The teacher, in fact, would make notes and put it in his book bag every night about how he did that particular day. And I know that's one of the first things I did when I got him off the school bus. I brought him in and let him unwind. And I'd open that up because it was, did Corey have a good day or did Corey have a bad day? And it seemed in Monroe that most of them were good days. There was an occasional bad day, and a bad day usually was defined by focus issues, being disruptive, things like that, that had manifested itself in a larger degree when he was still in Jamesburg from all the things that I had read. So I was totally involved with his education, from not just perusing online in terms of how he was doing in school, but going through his book bag, doing lessons with him. I tried to do as much as I could before Christopher came home, because he was doing the same thing after dinner with him.
So now let me bring you to January of 2020. Prior to January of 2020, did Christopher and Brianna Michelot basically share custody?
They did. It was called shared custody.
Okay. In January of 2020, did the custody change?
It did.
Okay. And what changed about the custody?
Christopher, I believe it was on January 28th, was given full custody.
Okay. And when Christopher received full custody, where did Corey live then?
With us.
Okay. So you were still living in Monroe.
Yes.
And up until the time Corey died, if you know, did Brianna Michelot ever regain custody?
No.
So between January of 2020 and March of 2021, how long was Corey in Monroe?
They moved to Barnegat in, I think the date was August 28th of 2020.
Now, between January of 2020 and August of 2020, did Brianna have visitation?
There were periods she had visitation.
When you say there were periods, what do you mean?
She had lost the ability for visitation in the beginning. I believe it was the end of January 2020.
Okay. And do you know when she regained visitation?
I don't remember that off the top of my head.
Was it prior to Chris moving to Barnegat?
Yes.
So let's get to Chris moving to Barnegat. When was that?
August 28th, 2020.
And do you recall why he moved to Barnegat?
I do.
When was that?
Well, Chris was concerned that as grandparents that we were assuming a burden, if you will, of the load of raising Corey. And we obviously were quite ecstatic with being able to help out. And Chris shared with us the need to be able to raise him by himself, and at the same time trying to find a school system that would be good enough for him. We had many a discussion when he chose to leave, because not only did we not want Corey, having just known him for a short amount of time, to leave, but we felt as if Chris down in Barnegat was going to be unprotected.
So now, from the moment you met Corey until the moment Christopher moved to Barnegat, did you ever see Christopher mistreat, abuse, or hit Corey?
Never.
I feel like him saying that they're unprotected, that Christopher was unprotected, I feel like that is sort of code that Corey was unprotected, because Corey was never abused while he lived in the home of his grandparents, of his father's grandparents. He was never abused. The abuse started when Christopher took Corey and they moved to Barnegat. That is when Corey started getting abused by his biological father.
Have you watched the treadmill video?
No,
Okay. Why not?
because I don't want to see.
Because he doesn't want to see how truly evil his own flesh and blood Christopher was to his grandson. That's exactly how I read this. I mean, you guys can tell me what your thoughts are, but look at him, he's upset. And both grandparents on Christopher's side, both of them, show more emotion than Christopher has this entire trial.
I don't want that to be my remembrance of Corey, that he was mistreated in that single instance on the treadmill.
Okay. Now, between March 20th and April 2nd of 2021, did you have any conversations with Christopher?
We did.
Okay. What did you discuss?
Well, we actually,
Objection, Judge, it's hearsay.
So what are exactly we doing here today? We're doing a 104 hearing on whether any of this testimony is admissible?
Right.
How is any of it admissible?
Background.
But how is, coming across like a loving grandfather who's obviously cares deeply for the child, but how are those things even going to come in front of the jury?
Well, it's a background to some extent of how this child came into their life. I think.
Well, yeah, the timetable is one thing, that's fine. It already came out to the, I believe, to the jury. The defendant wasn't aware when the child was born and things like that, but, I have a lot of concerns. Chris moving down to Barnegat would be, quote, unprotected. That's all opinion testimony, that's conspiracy theory testimony, so the rules of evidence don't really apply at a 104A hearing, because this is not the hearing on the admissibility of defendant statements. So you can ask things that involve some hearsay, but you need to have some parameters, because we can't be doing this in front of the jury. And what about the issue of this defendant testifying as to his hearsay knowledge of custody orders? Don't we use the order? Because he just testified that the mother did not regain custody. There's an exhibit that she regained joint legal custody on October 28th, 2020. So I'm not going to allow hearsay testimony, particularly incorrect hearsay testimony, when we have an exhibit that says something else. So you need to give me a focus of what you're intending to accomplish here.
Now I'm intending to accomplish the events between March 20th and April 2nd. And April 3rd, actually.
All right. Well, why 2020 though?
21.
Okay. All right. Well, that's obviously a relevant time period.
And that's what I was just asking.
Okay. All right. Go ahead.
So between March 20th, 2021 and April 3rd of 2021, did you have conversations with your son?
we did.
Did you discuss Corey?
We actually went down to see them
Okay.
on March 22nd.
And on March 22nd, where did you go see him?
Well, my wife had set up a viewing at two homes that we were discussing with Chris purchasing down in the Barnegat Bayville area.
So you went down to visit.
We did.
Okay. And what, if anything, did you, Corey, Christopher, and your wife do?
Well, we spent about 3 or 4 hours down in total. We visited two homes, walked through the homes with Corey, discussing, setting up bedroom. What would the house be able to accommodate? Everything that they wanted to do for Corey. Was there a bedroom for him? We looked at 2 homes. We had discussions with Chris about the pros and cons of all the houses. And then subsequent to that, we went down to my brother-in-law's house in Barnegat,
And who's your brother-in-law?
Michael Anderson.
Were you, Corey, Chris, and your brother-in-law's family all together?
We were.
And what, if anything, did you guys do together?
Well, we spent, I think it was about an hour in the house talking about mainly Chris and Corey and what we were trying to accomplish down there. And my brother-in-law already lived down there, and he has some opinion about the area, and as well as we did, because we were very familiar with it.
Okay. Now, did there come a time when you saw any bruising on Corey on that day?
We did.
Okay. Where did you see the bruising?
I saw a bruise on his forehead.
Okay. And did you or your wife speak to Corey about the bruise?
We did.
Okay. Was it you that spoke to him or your wife?
Both.
Okay. What, if anything, did
I-
you say to Corey?
What happened? And Corey said, I fell on a treadmill.
Now, between March 20th and April 2nd, did you have any contact with Brianna Micholo or Rebecca Micholo between those dates?
No.
Let me direct you now to, by the way, what was Corey's demeanor on that day you saw him on March 22nd of 2021?
Well, when we were looking at the houses, he was excited. He did a lot of running through the homes. And when we shared with him, I mean, he knew we were looking for a house for them. And so he had many different questions. Where would the dog be? Where would I go? That kind of thing. But he was energetic. I wouldn't say he was focused. I think it was a lot for him to take in. But he was very excited about it. In between visits, he was out running in the yard, and he was energetic.
Okay. Now, did there come a time on April 2nd of 2021 when you heard from Christopher?
There was.
And about what time was that?
It was sometime after 3.
Okay. And can you tell us what happened?
Well, the first calls I got that day were from my wife, saying that Chris was taking Corey.
Objection, Judge, it's hearsay.
So, I mean, that's permitted at this hearing. It's
Right,
not-
I just-
agree
I don't
it's
know-
hearsay, but,
You want us to wait at the end to
right, I mean,
Okay.
you're not waiving anything, but
right.
at a 104A hearing, hearsay is permitted, so, but obviously, if you're going to seek to admit this, you're going to have to give me some kind of exception
Right,
that
right.
would apply, and I have to hear from the state and make a decision on that.
Thank you, Judge.
For now, go ahead.
Okay. What did she say?
My wife said that Corey was being taken to the hospital by Chris.
And what's the next thing that happened?
The second call from my wife, and I'm in the car, I'm driving home, and it was Corey is going to the hospital or at the hospital, I forget which, and that he was bad.
Okay. And then, now what happened?
And then the third call was that he passed.
Okay. And who was that from?
My wife.
Did you have any contact with Christopher that day?
We did.
Okay. You have contact.
Well, the contact started with my wife. I'm driving. I went home, I picked my wife up, I'm driving. I'm listening to the conversation because it was loud between my wife and Christopher.
Okay. On April 2nd of 2021, did there come a time when you got to Southern Ocean Medical Center?
Yes.
Okay. And about what time was that?
I don't know. I don't remember.
Before you arrived there, did you call any police department?
I did.
Which police department did you call?
I looked up the hospital in terms of the venue. I believe it was Stafford, and I called the PD.
And why did you call them?
Chris was hysterical at the hospital, and in the conversations I was listening to with my wife, it didn't seem like anyone was there with him. And so I said, well, aren't the police there? And my wife would ask him, and he said, well, no one's here. And so I said, well, hang up and call the police. So she hung up, I took the phone, and I called the police department, and I told them what I believed to be happening, everything I knew. And the police officer asked me, what do you want me to do? And I said, well, I imagine you would contact somebody if the hospital hasn't already and send somebody there. And that was the gist of that conversation.
Now, when you got to the hospital, was Christopher there?
No.
Do you know where he went?
I don't. I know that he had left because I had talked to him twice, I believe, on the ride down after I called the PD.
Okay. Did there come a time on April 2nd that you heard from your son, Danny?
There was.
Okay. And without telling us what he told you, what, if anything, did you do as a result of what he told you?
Well, we communicated with Chris. Again, I was driving. I'm not sure if the communication was through a phone call or a text, but it was my wife letting him know what was happening at home.
Okay. And do you know what was happening at home?
I know what I was told.
Okay. So did there come a time after April 2nd that you saw things being done at your home?
There was.
Okay? Can you explain that?
Well, there was a long period of time where it appeared that vehicles were watching our house, sitting out in our cul-de-sac. And it happened quite a few times before I decided that I needed to take some kind of action.
Okay. Now, when you say take some kind of action, are you retired law enforcement?
I am.
Okay. What did you do in your career that you retired from?
I did various things. My state police career ran the gamut from being in a special operations unit for 6-7 years, emergency management, homeland security, so all types of law enforcement. When I left, I oversaw in Homeland Security New Jersey's critical infrastructure, the RERP program, Radiological Emergency Protection Program in the state, force protection for the state of New Jersey for all types of disasters and for threat level orange.
So when you say you took things into your own hands, what, if anything, did you do?
Well, I alerted the police department what was going on.
When you say the police department,
Monroe Police Department.
go ahead.
I was aware, people were sharing with me what was out there in terms of information being put out.
Well, did you see any of the information being?
I did.
What did you see? You physically see?
I saw numerous wanted posters, wanted for murder posters of my son.
So when you say a wanted for murder poster, what was the poster of?
It was a poster of Chris with wanted for murder.
Okay. Was it a picture of him?
It was.
And can you describe for us what that picture looked like?
The picture had the one that I saw had a jail bar superimposed in front of his face.
And where were these pictures located?
They were located on social media.
Okay. Were they located anywhere in your neighborhood?
There came a time where there was various postings put up in our neighborhood, on our neighbors' vehicles, and on the street lamps and poles surrounding my house.
Now,
And when posters went up to advocate for justice for Corey by the Michelot family, according to Bree, the Gregor family was removing them right behind them. Now, there's a difference between posting on a car or someone's property, but if they were removing signs, flyers, posters off of, poles and things, advocating for Corey, in my opinion, that's pretty crappy. And I think it's all because the bottom line was the Gregors were protecting Christopher. It's unfortunate that it seems to me that their love for Christopher is deeper than their love was for Corey.
prior to that, when you spoke to Danny, that's when these events were beginning to happen.
That was the beginning.
Okay. And did you convey that to Chris?
I did.
And by the way, do you know where Chris was at that moment?
I don't know exactly where he was.
Okay. Did you tell him to come home?
I did.
Okay.
I started with, don't leave,
Okay.
because he was at the hospital at the time during a couple of the conversations. And I said, I'm getting there as fast as I can. I don't go.
Okay. Did there come a time that he was gone and you had a conversation with him and he was coming back?
Yes.
And when was that?
I want to say it was the next day was the next conversation. In terms of his commitment to come back, I don't know if it was the next day or the next night or morning, but there was a time where he made the conscious decision to return.
Again, Christopher abandoned his son, his 6-year-old child, at the hospital upon learning that he passed away. And he didn't walk outside into the parking lot to walk around. He didn't go to a family home locally, a friend's home, go to a chapel in the hospital. Christopher got into his car and drove from New Jersey to Tennessee. That is very strange. And it pretty much took his parents convincing to come back. But again, everyone is innocent until proven guilty. Okay? But actions speak a lot. Your child just dies and you leave him and you leave the entire state? That's not normal behavior at all.
Okay, and that was when, April 3rd? If you remember.
It was either Saturday afternoon or Saturday night. There were many calls back and forth.
And were you involved in trying to make the arrangements for him to come back?
I was.
Okay, and what did you do for that?
Well, I mean, initially was no more than encouraging to come back. He had his vehicle. He had the means to get back. And then subsequent to that, he was detained. And so there were other arrangements had to be made to get him back.
Okay. And were you instrumental in helping him with those arrangements to get back?
You know, we made many phone calls in terms of being able to get a rental car.
Okay. So, how long was he gone?
I think it was about a day and a half.
And when you returned, where did you return to?
Our house.
Okay. And did you move back into your house?
He did.
While Christopher was away that day and a half, did you have any encounters with Brianna, Rebecca, or any of the Mitchell people?
The first time that I had a encounter with Brianna was sitting out in front of my house, but I don't recall the exact first time. There were many times.
Did there come a time when your house was vandalized?
There was.
And when was that? Do you recall?
Well, there were actually a couple incidents leading up to the night that we actually had to physically follow them from our development after I witnessed them throwing things at the house. So there were two incidents where it was with a car pulled up in front of the house. Two people got out. As I told the police, and it's in the report, I told the police because I was sitting upstairs watching TV so I could see right down the cul-de-sac. And two people got out, were throwing things at the house. And when the police officer came, he said, "Do you know who it is?" And I said, "Well, I'm 99% sure who it is, but it was a little dark, so I'd give him the benefit of the doubt. But I did give him names."
Okay. Did there come a time when they actually did vandalize your house?
So there was.
What happened?
Well, at that point, I was alert because there had been a few times of cars out in the front of the property, and then subsequently there was throwing nail polish and things. So now we're alerted to the fact that we need to be on guard. So I was sitting in the living room the night that they came down the street and began to throw things at our front door and broke a window and threw dead fish and ham hocks and goose egg stones and the like.
Now, I don't condone vandalism, throwing dead fish and things at someone's home. But at the same time, I've never lost someone. I'm very fortunate that I've never lost someone to abuse or murder. So I couldn't say how I would react, especially if it was a child or a grandchild. As Rebecca is the other grandmother, that is Brianna's mom. And then there was other family and folks involved. So I'm sure there's certain actions that the Michelot side took at the time out of upset and anger. They probably wish they didn't. But at the same time, emotion can get the better of you. And it's just tough to say what you would do in their shoes.
Did you make Christopher aware of these things that were going on?
He was aware of everything.
I have no further questions.
Questions, Mr.
I do, Judge.
Good.
So, Mr. Greger, in regard to what you were speaking about before in terms of the custody of your grandson, Corey, custody had been going back and forth between Corey's grandmother and your son, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And in terms of the changing of this custody, I mean, you were not a part of that, correct? Like you weren't at the court hearings, correct?
I attended one of the court hearings.
Okay. And are you aware of the full range of information regarding to what was happening between the custody issues in family court?
To the degree that DCP&P shared, and that Chris kept a file on all the court orders. And so I was familiar what they all said. What I wasn't familiar with was DCP&P reports, with the exception of one that they happened to leave at the house when we called them and interviewed us.
Okay. So are you aware then that in October 28th of 2020 that there was custody granted between your son and Brianna?
I'm aware that the language that was shared with me in terms of custody, because I asked this question of the workers when they came, when Corey was...
Well, I'm not asking you about the language that was shared. I'm asking you, were you aware specifically of that order?
I'm not sure which order it is.
Okay, the order that I just said, the October 28th of 2020 order where custody was granted between the defendant and Brianna, were you aware of the order?
I was aware of a shared custody order, but I don't remember the date.
Okay, so at that point in time then, as you just said, then there was a shared custody order between the defendant and Brianna, correct?
That's the language that was used, yes.
Okay. So previous to that then, the custody arrangement had been going between your son and Corey's grandmother, correct?
Correct.
And during this time period, Brianna was actually never had custody of Corey, correct? It was between the grandmother and the defendant.
All the court documents that I saw was Rebecca Michelli versus Brianna and Christopher Greger.
That's correct. Thank you. So during the time period when all this was going on, there was a period of time that your son actually had lost custody of Corey as well, correct?
There was.
Okay. So Corey came to live with you when he was in kindergarten school year, correct?
If that corresponds with his age at the time, I don't remember if it was kindergarten or first.
Well, you just testified before that you were so involved in his education, correct?
I was.
So if you were so involved in his education, yet you didn't know what school year he was in?
What I knew was his curriculum, his assignments, and his evaluations.
Okay, so there was a time period then which you were so involved in his education, yet you didn't know what grade he was in, that Corey came to live with you, correct?
Correct.
And during that time frame, Corey was also visiting with his grandmother, correct?
Correct.
And then at that time, it's actually not custody, but your son had residency over Corey, correct?
I think the term that was shared with me by DCP&P is he was the custodial parent.
Okay. So, in, I believe it's August, right, of 2020, then Corey and your son moved to Barnegat, correct?
Correct.
And when they moved to Barnegat, they at that time had left living in your home in Monroe, correct?
Correct.
And at that point in time, the defendant and Corey, you were no longer so involved in Corey's care, correct?
I was involved to every degree I could be living in Monroe while they were living in Barnegat.
Okay. And while the defendant and Corey were in Barnegat living, you weren't having daily contact with the two of them, correct?
Between my wife and I, it was pretty close.
You weren't going to see them every single day traveling from Monroe to Barnegat, correct?
We didn't see him every day, no.
Okay, and obviously you were not present during all the times that the defendant and his son were together in the apartment in Barnegat, correct?
No, I wasn't there all the time.
Okay. So the night of April 1st, right, of 2021, you weren't in Barnegat that evening, correct?
No,
And you weren't with the defendant and Corey that evening, correct?
correct.
And you didn't go to Jersey Shore Hospital, correct?
Correct.
And you didn't go to the pediatrician, correct?
Correct.
And you did not visit your son later that evening or see Corey that evening after Corey returned that morning, correct?
Correct.
So anything that was going on April 1st of 2021, you learned that from your son, correct?
I also learned it from my wife.
Right, so you have no firsthand knowledge of any of the events that transpired on April 1st of 2021, correct?
I wasn't there.
Okay. So, calling your attention now to the day that Corey passed, you had spoken to your son while he was at the hospital, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And your son had spoken to your wife on the telephone at approximately 4:54, correct?
Spoke numerous times.
Okay. And based upon this conversation, you and your wife then began to travel down to the hospital, correct?
We did.
And Corey was pronounced at approximately 5:03 p.m. that day.
Okay.
So are you aware that he was pronounced?
I don't know the time of pronouncement.
Okay.
No.
So you're not sure about that? Okay. So you actually called the Stafford Township Police Department at about what time?
I don't recall the time.
Okay, but you were on your way down to the hospital when you called, right?
It was.
And when you called while you were on your way down to the hospital, you called this in as a unintended death?
I didn't use that terminology.
Didn't you tell Detective Mitchell in a statement that you gave to him that you called it in because it was an unattended death?
Again, I'm not sure where that terminology is coming from.
Well, didn't you say that you were aware of the terminology because of your experience in law enforcement?
I don't believe I used unattended death. What I described to the detective was that, well, I described what was relayed to me from Christopher, and that Christopher was at the hospital. when Corey passed. I'm not sure the words, I know what an unintended death is, but I don't know that I ever used those words.
Okay. So,
You
you,
saying unintended or on?
unintended,
Unintended, not on, I didn't know it said on.
unattended,
UNA or UNI?
Hey.
A. Unattended, yeah.
We know the child died in the hospital, so.
Yeah,
You just cross-examine whether you use that term.
Yes,
Good.
exactly. Thank you, Judge. So when you got to the hospital, your son wasn't there.
no.
And do you know when your son left the hospital?
I don't know the exact time now.
But that would have been before you arrived at the hospital, correct?
Yes,
Okay, so in the time between when your son had left the hospital until you arrived at the hospital, Corey was at the hospital alone, correct?
yes.
Now, after Corey passed, you spoke to Detective Mitchell from the prosecutor's office, correct?
I did.
And when you spoke to Detective Mitchell at the prosecutor's office, you never said anything about you being bothered, correct, by the family?
Bothered by the family?
Yeah, about Rebecca or any of these things when you spoke to the police.
I don't recall.
Okay, so when you were sitting down with the officers after this happened, this what information wasn't important to you, correct?
What was important to me at that time was recanting the 2 years of struggles that led to this incident.
Okay. And again, when you spoke to the police at that particular time, in particular Dennis Mitchell, you had told him, quote, "It's an unattended death, and you gonna send somebody over or," correct?
I don't remember using those words, but the gist of the conversation, you're saying my discussion with, you're saying my discussion with the detective or the call to Stafford?
I'm saying when you had a discussion with the detective, when you were speaking to him, you used the words, "It's an unattended death," and you're gonna send somebody over or I should have known it was Barnegat. Didn't you say that to Detective Mitchell?
I'm not sure of the context there.
Okay,
I'm
well, I
not sure
can
that
show
it's
you
Barnegat.
I'm now gonna-
If what you're referring to, what it sounds as if my call to Stafford,
Sir,
where
referring to the statement you gave to Detective Mitchell, Ms. Lincoln, would you please show it to him?
Sure, Judge.
It refreshes his recollection that the prosecutor took the statement.
Your Honor, we're gonna mark this as S-160, if I may approach.
Sir.
Thank you. And if you can, I'm going to direct your attention to that particular set of paragraphs.
Well, first, do you recall giving a statement to
Yeah.
Detective Mitchell?
a very long statement, Your Honor.
Right. Were you truthful in that statement?
As truthful as I could be.
Okay. So then please look at the part that Ms. Lanto's asking them to review. What's the question, Ms. Lanto?
Okay.
So do you recall?
So it's possible I used the word. What I was referring to and the gist of the whole conversation here was that the police weren't there and that my grandson had just passed away. And are they sending someone to the hospital?
Right. And you used the words, "It's an unattended death," correct? That was the question.
Well, that's what it says. And if that's what I said, I don't remember saying it.
Okay. Thank you, Judge. No further questions.
So the second part would be Mama. This is Christopher's mom, Carolyn. If you notice, she kind of gives a bit of a smile to her son. And again, this is probably the most emotion, besides a bit of crying, without tears during the autopsy photos from Christopher.
Good morning, Ms. Greger. Are you the mother of Christopher Greger?
I am.
Did there come a time in your life where you knew you had a grandson?
Yes.
Okay? And what was that?
2019.
And that's Corey. Mitchell.
Corey, yes.
And when you learned of this, did there come a point in your life where Corey Mitchell moved into your home?
Yes.
And that was in Monroe.
Yes.
I have to wonder, with the smirks he gives his mama there, do you think he's closest with his mom? I feel like Dad may be less sympathetic, but Mom, she's giving him some comforting looks.
The time when Corey moved out of your home.
Yes.
And what was that?
August of 2019, 2020.
Okay. Now, let me direct your attention to the time frame between March 20th, 2021 and April 3rd of 2021. Between March 20th of 2021 and April 3rd of 2021, did you see your grandson?
Yes.
And when was that?
March 22nd.
Okay. And can you tell us about that?
Yes. Chris was interested in purchasing a home. So I'm a real estate agent, as Chris was, and we found 2 homes in the Barnegat area, Bayville, that area, and we went, myself, Chris, Corey, and my husband, we went to go see the homes, and then afterward, we went to visit my brother for a little bit. He lives in Barnegat, and then we went out for dinner.
Where'd you go to dinner?
I think it's called the Sunset Marina. It's in Barnegat.
Okay. Now, during the day, at any point, did you notice any bruises, contusions, abrasions to Corey?
Yes.
Okay. What did you observe?
He had a bruise on his forehead.
And did you ask him about it?
Yes.
What did you say?
Where did the bruise come from, Corey?
And what happened?
And he told me he fell on the treadmill.
Now, you were with him the whole day on March 22nd? From what time to what time?
Approximately 4 o'clock till about 7:30.
Okay. And during that time from 4 o'clock to 7:30, what was Corey's demeanor?
He was fine. He was energetic. He actually got me scared at one of the houses because it was a little close to a main road. And we were outside and he was excited and running around. And I was like worried because there were cars and trying to keep him contained while Dave and Chris looked at the house. He was just his normal, fun self.
Okay. What was Christopher's demeanor?
He was fine. He was, looking at the house. He really wanted to find a house for him and Corey and their dog, Peyton. And he wanted to be in a good school district. So he was excited to try to find something. So, he was very interested in looking at the house and whatnot.
Now, between March 22nd now and April 3rd, did you see Corey?
I did not.
Did you see the treadmill video from March 20th?
I have not.
So,
Again, she's not watched the treadmill video. I think that's very telling that they are avoiding that video. And I do feel like Christopher puts on a front. He acts different in front of his parents and his family. When he is alone with his son, he is not the same person. He is domineering, abusive, and it's definitely not the same Christopher that was seen when Corey was living at home with his grandparents. Corey was in a safe place there, as just as he was when he lived with his other grandmother. And Brianna. Corey was safe. It wasn't until Corey started living full time and Christopher had time alone with him that the real abuse started for Corey.
2nd of 2021, did you receive any phone call or text message from your son, Christopher?
Yes.
And at what time was that?
I think I texted him first in the morning to see if Corey had come home. And he told me he had. I'm paraphrasing,
But did he tell you in a text message?
That was in a text message, yes.
Go ahead.
So we texted back and forth about, I asked him what time, how is he, because he had been kept up late the night before, and I, had been on the phone the night before with Chris, and I knew he had been in the hospital, and I wanted to know how he was. And Chris said when he got home, he was very tired, and I said to him, just let him go to sleep. I just assumed he was up till 1:30 in the morning as a little boy. He's probably dead tired. Just let him lay down and sleep and rest. So we went back and forth a little bit about that. And then about noontime, we texted more.
Who texted who?
I want to say I texted Chris just to see how Corey was. And then we had some real estate business to discuss. We did that. And then I heard from him later on in the afternoon that he was taking Corey to the hospital.
What time was that?
I want to say 3-ish, something in that area.
Phone call or a text?
I believe that was a phone call.
Okay. Did he tell you why?
He didn't really know why. He
No,
said,
Did he tell you, if you remember, did he tell you why he was taking Corey to the hospital?
because he was lethargic, something's wrong with him. Something's wrong, has to take him, Took him to the hospital. My husband was at the dentist at the time. I called him to let him know something was going on. Get another phone call from Chris that, something's really wrong with him.
What time was that?
I don't know. I don't know.
You were still home in Monroe?
I was home.
Okay.
I was home
In Monroe?
in Monroe. And the next phone call I receive, Chris is hysterical. Hysterical. What did she do to him? He's screaming on the phone. And I'm like, what's going on? And he tells me Corey passed. So I called my husband. I'm flipping out at the house. And my son Danny's home, my youngest. And I'm screaming. He comes, runs upstairs. What's going on? Thank God my husband came home very quickly after that. We got in the car and went down there. So we're calling Chris. I was so worried because he just was so adamant that something happened when he was with his mother. Something happened to him.
First of all, he was putting together this idea in the minds of his parents that his mother did something to him. And he's crying. He's upset, hysterical, because he knew he screwed up. Not just a little bit. He screwed up big time. And he's upset because he's talking to his mama. Look at him here in court. He's crying because his mom is upset. I think he and his mom are probably a lot closer than he is with his dad. Seems like her getting upset really affects Christopher. It's definitely, to me, he is making his story starting to come together. But it's not going to fly for long because the truth comes out. But he is making sure he tells his mom, oh, Brianna did something to Corey, and what did she do? He was fine, you know. But actions speak louder than his words, which are lies. He couldn't even stick around. He flees. He runs away from his problems. I gotta wonder if he did that growing up.
So I said, Chris, don't go there. Don't go to their house. Don't, just please wait for us. So we left. As we're driving, my son calls me,
Which son? Yeah.
Daniel, my youngest. He was home by himself. I don't know how long after this was. He calls me. He's getting phone calls at the house. On our house phone. Threats. People are, your brother's a murderer. You know, this was like, it was ridiculous how quickly.
So when you spoke about how quickly, I'm trying to develop a time frame.
Yeah.
Were you and Mr. Greger in the vehicle that you were driving to Southern Ocean Methodist when you received that call?
Yeah, I believe so. I you know, it's like the whole thing was we were devastated. We're crying in the car. We're calling the police in the car because no one was there. There was no police, nobody. So we're calling the police. We're trying to find out what's going on. At some point, we get to the hospital,
Was
and
Christopher there?
no.
Okay.
No. And Danny calls us again. Rebecca was at the house. And she was making threats. I just said, you know, go in the house. Just lock the doors, go in the house, just stay in the house.
Now, did you have any communication with Chris during this time period?
Yes,
Okay. Was it by phone or by text?
both.
Okay. When was the first communication you had with Chris? After the phone call you've already described for us.
I don't know times.
Okay.
I don't know times.
Okay.
I mean-
Well, let's use different things that happened that day. There came a time you went to the police station?
Yes,
Which police station did you
I
go
believe it was Barnegat.
to? Okay. Do you recall what time you got to Barnegat?
No.
Objection.
What is up with a lot of these folks not knowing times? I can maybe gather that you may not know it right off the bat because panic sets in. You're hearing that your grandson is really seriously ill. Then you find out he's deceased. So you're scrambling to get in the car, to get to the hospital, to supposedly comfort your son and be there with your grandson. But now, this was April 2021. You would have thought that grandma here would kind of have an idea about the times at this point. But that's just a side note. I seem to notice that in a lot of these cases that these people are always saying, "Oh, I don't know times. I don't pay attention to times." Well, we all kind of have an inkling, you know. You know, if you're working till a certain time, you eat dinner or lunch. You know, there's at least a range. You know, a period of time. That said, I can't get over that this is the most emotion that we have seen out of Christopher. He's got to be a mama's boy.
She doesn't remember any of the times, Judge.
Well,
I wasn't looking at
first
the
of all,
clock.
Rebecca Williams recalled what time you got there. She said she doesn't recall.
I wasn't looking at a clock. I was hysterical that my grandson had just passed. I wasn't timing things.
This is after the hospital?
Yes. This is after you arrived at the hospital?
Excuse me?
This is after you responded to the hospital?
We went to the hospital. We were there for a bit. The police came. And then they asked us if we would go to the police station to give a, statement or whatever. And we agreed, and we went.
Okay. Phone call with Danny. Did it happen prior to that or after that?
Oh, it was prior to that.
Was it prior to getting to the hospital?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now,
Not the Rebecca one, the getting a phone call at the house.
the Rebecca one.
I believe that happened at the hospital.
When we were at the hospital before you went to Barney?
Yes.
Okay. Do you remember speaking to Chris after you received that phone call?
I didn't speak to him. It was texting.
Would you text him?
I let him know what was going on.
Did you respond?
I don't think so.
Did you have any communication with him after that? Chris? No.
That night,
When was the next time you had communication?
I think the next time I had been texting him to let him know things that were going on, because that night, friends of ours, were contacting us to tell us there were posts on Facebook saying terrible things about Chris, saying he was wanted, giving our address out, saying...
By the way, when you were at the Barney Police Department, did anybody tell you that they were looking for your son?
No,
Did you give an interview to Detective Mitchell?
I gave it to a detective. I don't know. I don't recall his
Is he a
name.
tall, handsome fellow?
I don't recall.
The detective you gave the statement to, did he tell you at that moment that your son was wanted and he was a fugitive?
Oh, no.
So when you were communicating with your son, were you communicating with him the things that were happening to you, your family, and
On Facebook, yeah.
when's the next time you spoke to either Christopher or texted to him that he responded?
I believe it was the next day,
April 3rd.
April 3rd.
About what time was that?
It was probably in the afternoon.
And did you know where he was?
No,
Did there come a time where after that communication that you knew he was coming back?
yes.
Okay. When was that?
I believe it was that night,
April 3rd.
April 3rd.
Okay. And did you help make the arrangements to get him back?
No.
Okay. Did he come back?
Oh, yeah.
And when was that?
That was on the 4th. He was back home to the house.
But he started making the arrangements to come back, to your knowledge, on April 3rd.
April 3rd.
Do you know where he was when you now started communicating?
I didn't know anything until he was stopped, and then we found out where he was. I had no idea where he was.
Where was he stopped?
In Tennessee.
By the way, when he was stopped, was he taken into custody?
No,
Did anybody at that time tell you that he was wanted for murder?
no,
Did anybody at that time tell you he was a fugitive?
no.
Did they let him go?
Yes,
Was he in your home the next day?
yes.
Did you ever speak with Christopher about taking care of his dog?
Yes.
And when was that?
We didn't speak, it was a text.
And when was that?
That was the night that Carl passed.
So on the 2nd.
Yes.
Do you recall about what time that was?
No.
No further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Strong.
Thank you. Were you waiting in the hallway before you came in to testify?
Yes.
Were you waiting with your husband?
Excuse me?
Were you waiting with your husband, Mr. Gregor?
Prior to, yeah.
Did he get a chance to tell you about his testimony before you came in today?
He just told me he broke down a little bit. And he, I just wanted to know how he was, how he felt.
Now, you said that you saw Corey on March 22nd, 2021, right? That was a Monday? So it would have been after school?
Maybe you have to say yes or no, please.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
And when you saw Corey, you were looking at houses, right?
Yes.
You went to visit your brother.
Yes.
You had dinner.
Yes.
And you saw bruises on her.
I only saw one
On his face.
on his forehead.
And he told you where he got it.
Yes.
And he told you that he fell off the treadmill.
He told me he fell on the treadmill.
On the treadmill.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, you gave a statement to Detective Mitchell at the Barnegat Police Department the night that Corey passed, correct?
Mm-hmm.
That would have been April
Oh, I'm sorry.
2nd.
Yes.
April 2nd, 2021?
Yes.
That was between 8:30 and 9:30 p.m., right?
I don't remember the time.
It was after you left Southern Ocean Medical Center.
Okay.
right? I'm
Yes.
asking you.
Yes.
Was it dark outside?
It was dark. Yes.
And that statement was about 36 minutes long, right?
I have no idea.
If I tell you it was 36 minutes long, would you believe me?
If that's what you said it is, I'll believe you. Yes.
And you gave that statement with your husband, right?
Yes.
And you provided the police with whatever information you could, right?
Yes.
And you wanted to assist in trying to figure out where the defendant was, right?
I don't know at that time if that was foremost on my mind.
And you didn't know what happened to Corey, right?
True.
Did you ever tell the police that the last time you saw Corey, he had a bruise on his head?
I don't recall.
Did you ever tell the police that the last time you saw Corey, he told you that he fell off a treadmill?
Honestly, I don't recall.
If I showed you your statement that you gave the detective, would it help you recall if you told them?
It would. Yes.
I'm showing you what's been marked for identification as S-160. Your statement to Detective Mitchell on March 2nd, 2021.
Okay.
Your husband.
You mean April?
I'm sorry, April 2nd, 2021.
Okay.
Could you tell me if that helps refresh your recollection as to whether you told the detectives that Corey fell off a treadmill or had a bruise on his head?
I don't see it.
Do you not see it because it's not there?
I guess so.
Now, wouldn't it be important for the detectives looking into Corey's death to know that just days prior, he told you that he fell from a treadmill?
No, because when we saw him on the 22nd, he was fine. He was running around. He was not traumatized by falling off the treadmill or falling on the treadmill.
In your opinion, right?
My opinion,
Yes
my
or no, ma'am?
husband's,
Yes or no? Your opinion.
in my opinion, yes.
Now, as you sit here today, you have never seen the video of the treadmill, right?
Yes.
So, your testimony is that you didn't tell the police that Corey fell from a treadmill because, in your opinion, that wasn't important at the time, yes or no?
Yes.
And between March 22nd, 2021, and actually ever again after that, you never saw Corey in person again.
Yes.
Now, bringing your attention to April 2nd of 2021, or April 1st of 2021, you were not down in Barnegat with the defendant, were you?
No.
You were not with Corey, were you?
No.
And anything that you know about April 1st of 2021, you only know what the defendant told you.
As far as what?
As far as where Corey was and what was happening that evening. You
Yes.
only know what he told you, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And as far as April 2nd of 2021, you were not in Barnegat, right?
No.
You did not go there and see Corey, right?
No.
You only know what was going on in the defendant's apartment that day based upon what he told you, right?
Yes.
Now, during the statement that you gave to the police, you told them that you spoke to the defendant at 11 a.m., right?
I don't recall the time.
If I showed you your statement, would it help refresh your recollection about
I
the
might have
time?
said that, but I don't know if that was the exact time.
You spoke to the police
Mm-hmm.
that day, April 2nd, right?
Yes.
and you told them 11 a.m.
I guess I did, yes.
Okay. And as you sit here today, years later, you've remembered throughout the course of the time that you didn't remember. Is that so?
You're asking me if what I told him I remembered that day, and now 3 years later, that's a big difference in time. I don't remember the exact time. It might have been 11, it might have been 11:30. I'm not
Is
sure.
it fair to say that you texted with your son after 11 a.m. on April
Yes.
2nd, 2021?
Yes,
And that's the first time during those text messages that he told you that he observed anything different about Corey, correct?
no, he told me in the morning when he got in that he was sleepy.
And you said that was via text?
That was texts, yes.
So in the morning was text?
Mm-hmm.
At 11 a.m. was text?
Yes,
Noon was text?
all texts,
Okay.
yes.
And then what about 3 o'clock?
That's
your
when
friend.
Chris called me.
That's when he called you?
Yes,
Are you sure that you didn't call him at 3 o'clock?
I might have called him, yeah.
Now, you said that you spoke to the defendant while he was at the hospital, right?
That's when he called me, yeah.
And that was all phone calls, correct?
Mhm.
Until the last, what was the text message?
The last phone call, I believe, was when he had left the hospital.
Okay. And the last communication that you had from him while he was still in New Jersey was the text message that you described, right?
So he called me when
I'm just asking about the text message.
I'm trying
and the
to
last
get it
communication
ready
from
in
him.
trying to go through some.
Once it's ready, just tell me yes or no.
Okay, so he called me, we drove down there, and then we
Could
were
you ask the woman
texting.
to answer my question. If she has to process it, that's okay in her mind.
No, I'm not sure what the question is at this point. Is it the last communication was
Yeah.
text, is that the question?
The
Is
last
that what-
communication from the defendant
Was
while
text.
he was in New Jersey was text.
Was text,
Okay,
yes,
thank you. And that's the one that you testified about earlier with the dog, right?
with the dog.
Okay. Now, could you tell me what the last 4 digits of Danny's phone number are?
I don't know off the top of my head.
You don't know Danny's phone number.
It's saved on my phone as my son's name.
And you said that as you were driving down to the hospital, that's when Danny called you, correct?
I believe so, yes.
And that he was telling you secondhand about threats that he saw or heard.
Yes.
Okay. You actually didn't get any of those threats, right?
Not that night, no.
Right. And you weren't home.
No,
Okay. So none of those things were firsthand to you.
no.
And you got to the hospital and the defendant was no longer there.
Correct.
And then Danny didn't call you again till later on at night to talk to you about Rebecca.
Maybe, yes, okay, yes.
Okay. And you weren't there for that either.
I was not,
So this is all coming from Danny.
right.
Okay. And are you aware that the defendant wouldn't let the hospital call Brianna Michelot about Corey while he was there?
I have no,
Are you aware that Brianna didn't even know that Corey had passed until 6 o'clock?
no,
And when you spoke to the police about everything that was going on during that statement, you didn't tell them about all that information from Danny,
No.
did you? Okay.
no.
In fact, you and your husband were talking about the fact that Danny and your daughter Kimberly were fine, right?
We're fine? I don't know what you mean by that.
Do you remember you and your husband saying, but Danny and Kim are home, they're fine?
I guess, yeah, they're home and they're okay, yes.
They were fine, right?
Yeah, they were fine.
And so you said that you had sent your son, the defendant, a number of communications about what was going on, but he didn't respond to you, correct?
No. Yes,
And he didn't respond to you until April 3rd,
the
correct?
next day, yeah.
And you said he was home on the 4th?
Yes,
Are you aware that in the morning of the 4th, he was still in Tennessee?
he might have been, yes.
And he picked someone up at the airport towards noon on the 4th?
I guess that's the time, yes.
And you're aware that it's at least an 11-hour drive home from there?
They flew home.
So Christopher doesn't really speak to his mother, except once he leaves the hospital, except to ask her to take care of his dog. It's kind of telling about how much he cares about his dog over his son.
Nothing else, Judge.
Resolution.
Ms. Schroen just said that your son was in Tennessee at the time.
And yes,
I'm sorry, yes.
And were you part of making any of the arrangements
No.
for him to come back?
No,
Come back?
he did.
Was it the next day?
It was the 4th. He was home the 4th.
And he was in your home?
In my home.
And did you physically look at him and see him?
I did.
Touch him?
Yes,
So it was him?
it was him.
Thank you.
That was a little ridiculous. But it seems to me that I'm curious if they're gonna keep specifically mom here. If she's going to talk about Daniel, their youngest son, it's a lot of hearsay there. I am curious if he's gonna be testifying as well this week. But again, this is very telling about what Christopher's parents, how they reacted. Obviously much more emotion and much more feeling than Christopher. And I do fully believe that they cared about Corey. But their continued coddling or defense of Christopher and not protecting their grandson. I mean, I can't imagine, not protecting your own grandchild. If they loved him as much as they say, and I believe they did, they are avoiding the truth about how abusive and horrible Christopher was to Corey when he was not under the care, under their roof. And by continuing to stay on his, side, I'm not sure that's the right word. I mean, I understand being there for your child. You're going to always support your child, but at the same time, if your child abused and allegedly murdered your grandbaby, I mean, that's a whole different ballgame. And I believe she does care about him. I mean, both her and her husband. I believe Christopher's parents care a lot about Corey. But why are they not being... They're not there for Corey now. And that's hurtful. And they should be there for him. No, I'm not expecting the Gregors and the Michelot family to, hold hands and sing hallelujah or whatever. Kumbaya. But you would think that by continually battling, this battle between these two families who had a 6-year-old child in common would eventually end when they realized that Christopher was incredibly wrong. But I don't know. Again, I just can't see being okay with your son abusing and the abuse leading to his death. And you claim you love him, your grandson, but yet you're not by his side. Alright, guys, that's all I've got for this one. Again, they're back in court on Wednesday, the 15th. And so this will kind of get us, up to a good point. I obviously didn't cover the entire 6 days, just a bit of stuff. If you would like to watch or go through any of the other testimony, law and crime trials, as well as Court TV has those videos readily available. Alright, I hope you have a great rest of the day. And most of all, stay safe.